West Footscray, late afternoon. The wind is blowing this way, and as always there is a stench of burning rubber, the familiar smell of West Footscray. It's the billowing grey smoke from the Dunlop Olympic factory in Cross Street. I notice I am breathing more shallowly.
In 1950, there were plenty of paddocks, and everybody was building around. You could hear tap, tap, tap every weekend. The street was full of local kids, and we had these huge blocks the kids used to play in, and everyone had a lovely garden. You're caring for your children and worrying about all their things. The factories gradually started to creep in, and the smells, and you would open your windows when you went to bed, and your doors, and you'd have to shut them quickly. The smells just got so bad. They put a factory down the end of the street, and I thought, well, he's got a permit as long as he beautifies. And I thought, well, it won't be too bad, and we didn't think much about it at all. Then this hideous big metal thing rose up, and I thought, well, when's the beautifying arriving? And then I see a little thing in the paper about a mini steel mill. And I started to say to different people, and they said, oh, a mini steel mill, that's nothing. And I said, a steel mill's a steel mill. There was a small one up in Geelong Road years ago. And I rang one councillor, and he said, oh, wait till the meeting, that we'll know. And another councillor said, oh, that's a mini mill, that won't be any problem. I said, but a steel mill's a steel mill. I said, there's flashes, there's noises, there's traffic. I said, don't you know what a steel mill is? It evolved that we had solicitors and chemists and all local boys helping us to fight this steel mill threat.
We'd heard that Smorgans were going to try and build a steel mill in Tottenham, right next to the Tottenham Primary School, right next to a residential area, and we decided that we'd challenge that. We made contact with a group, Sunshine Action Group, who was basically led by a bloke by the name of Alan Finch, and we decided to join forces with them.
What right do these companies have to keep people up at night just through the noise that they're making, to make it unpleasant for them to live? And people have been putting up with it for years, assuming that, well, just because you live in West Footscray or Kingsville, that's just a fact of life.
What we said was that unless there was a challenge to those sort of licences, there would never be any proper planning or regulations to control the mushrooming of these offensive and noxious industries. The government never looked at the cumulative effect of these industries, and so at one stage I had 50 appeals, over 50 appeals in the Planning Appeals Tribunal.
Companies were required to give notice that their licence was up for review. We'd check the papers to find them. Then we'd put in a notice of objection, having had a look at their licence and comparing it with the State Environment Protection Policies, which are the gazetted regulations as to what emissions are allowed to be. Upon seeing that there are grounds, as there invariably were, for challenging the licence, we would lodge our appeals with the Planning Appeals Board. There would be a representative from the company, normally a QC and a junior, and a couple of experts in chemistry and planning and industry. Then there'd be the EPA there. They'd be hand in glove, they'd be chatting with each other. They had a very cosy relationship.
It's no coincidence that the type of housing estates that perimeter these industries are housing commission estates. These industries are allowed to develop, extend their plants.
Environmental standards in Victoria have never been adequately policed. and they remain inadequately policed. There is a distinction in the type of industry that ought to be allowed in metropolitan areas, or areas where there's any sort of density population. And the western suburbs is a very densely populated region, and it's obscene, it is ridiculous that the proliferation of toxic industry using and discharging toxic chemicals capable of causing disease and death exists in the western suburbs. There are far too many of them. There ought to be less toxic industry, and it ought to be better regulated.
I went door to door, and everybody said, "You won't do it. You won't do it." I said, "Look, we're stronger than millionaires. We're just people, but there's a lot of us." I said, "Have a go." I had a very emotional scene with Darren Hinch.
And Joan Davis, who's the secretary of the Kingsville Action Group, a committee of local residents who don't want the steel mill. And I'll read it to you because it sets out their side of the story fairly well. She says, "I'm writing from desperation as it seems no one is prepared to make public the consequences of the proposed Board of Works Amendment 149, which..." I noticed that another development this morning has mentioned an article in Truth saying Mr. Liebman accused of favouring the Smorgon family. You're really alleging that yourself, aren't you? The Minister for Planning is favouring special treatment to the Smorgons.
Well, we would think so, to consider starting at 350 metres from home. You must have to be favoured to be able to get that.
You've got some young local solicitors out there who've been helping you.
We have the Robert Starry, Peter Borden, and another Paul Graham, and a Terry.
The day she went on the Darren Hinch program and tried to take Smorgons apart.
Her involvement in this issue was really one that politicised her.
They explained to us that we could put submissions in, and nobody around this area knew we could put a submission in objecting. But it's a desperate situation, because once this is passed, we're going to get this belting steel mill up there, and I tell you what, there's residents almost suicidal. They have large families, they've invested money, and they say, what can they do? They're desperate. Now, in my case, my husband built my house with his own two hands. He started in 1950, and my home is my castle, and no way will I let the house up next door. But I'm just a housewife, I'm a hobbyist, I love a garden, and I've just thrown down my garden, my hobbies, and my housework to find this. You suggest I write him a letter?
If you open up lines of communication with the Minister, it wouldn't do any harm at all.
I feel he is such a,
This spot, the Footscray Hill, overlooking the Maribyrnong River and Valley and Flemington, Kensington and the city, is very important to understanding the history of Footscray and its industries, because it was the river that attracted those early industries and attracted the Melbourne City Council to put its abattoirs at Flemington. And those abattoirs acted like a magnet. They drew to them all the industrialists who wanted to boil down the tallow, clean the skins, and throw the refuse, of course, into the Maribyrnong River. That's really where the story of Footscray and its industries begins, right below this spot. The city abattoirs were established in the 1850s. And by the early 1860s, there's a host of tanners and curriers and boiling down people and candle makers all along the river. And then with the expansion of Melbourne in the 80s, marvellous Melbourne of the 1880s, a whole host of new industries established here, which have been pushed out from Melbourne City because Melbourne City doesn't want the smells. So they pushed them out to Footscray. And there's a great boom here. Again, boiling down, meat processing, candle making. And it can all happen here because we have a working class population dependent on it for its livelihood, a council heavily influenced by manufacturers who are principals in these firms, and a board of health which is totally compliant It worries about the condition of the Yarra River below Melbourne. It is totally indifferent to the condition of the Maribyrnong River at Footscray. And so the story goes on. Melbourne acquires the land between the river and the city of Melbourne and proceeds to develop that as its backyard. The legacy of that we see today with chemical storages on the flats below Footscray.
There were wall-to-wall flames in the building when the first emergency crews arrived about 3 o'clock, but at that stage no one could predict that it would develop into one of the worst blazes in recent history. The warehouse in Footscray Road contained almost 3,000 tonnes of agricultural chemicals, along with plastics and a large quantity of petroleum products.
It's the worst sort of fire that a firefighter has to face. You have the additional problems not only of fire, the risks of explosions and exposure to hazardous materials.
As the firefighting efforts continued, emergency crews became aware of a more sinister long-term threat. The cloud of smoke, big enough to be seen across the city, was highly toxic, a cocktail of lethal substances.
Industries along the river were locked there because they needed to use the river as a drain and for transport. And of course their power came from coal. But by the 1920s, a lot of industries were moving out to the plains because they were using lorry transport, and of course they had electricity provided by the State Electricity Commission. They could build huge plants on modern streamlined lines using large sites that weren't available to them around here. And the people of Footscray were also moving west. They were moving into new homes, brick veneers, right across the plains. And for a long time, it seemed that industry and housing could coexist quite happily and peacefully. By the 1960s and 70s, housing had virtually been built to the, if not to the doors, then to the gates of many large industries in the West. Just by a process of constant subdivision, an absence of proper planning for buffer zones, people found that they had bought land next to an industrial zone well before the industry was built or extended, and within their early family life they would find huge factories going up virtually at the end of the street.
Initially, it seemed like a recipe for disaster. A fire involving ethane gas and minor traces of what firemen say was a toxic chemical called ethyl mercaptan. The first crews arrived at the Altona Petrochemical Company about 10 o'clock last night. They immediately called for assistance and another 45 men were rushed to the scene.
The Williamstown refinery was surrounded by emergency vehicles as fire crews rushed to minimise the danger. Unknown amounts of fuel had gushed into the sewage system.
It's raw gasoline. And we have had explosive readings around the vicinity. We've evacuated everybody in the area.
Oh, it's a lovely area. It's open. It's always cooler than anywhere else. You know, it's 10 degrees cooler than Footscray when you come through. But, a lovely safe beach and good sporting facilities, you know. My family came down here when I was 6 months old because they'd never heard of Altona, but they'd heard that it was a safe beach, you know, and good place to rear children. And then you find out years later that there's all this pollution and deadly chemicals and gases and whatever, and it's no longer safe because it's a time bomb, you know, could go up any time. Of course, the pollution, it's always on the hot nights and you can't sleep, you get up for a drink of water and there it is, bellowing, you know, everywhere.
There are so many chemicals around Altona which are capable of hurting people, and as Mum was saying, you've got a lot of them together in a very confined space. The Goodrich plant in Croyd Creek Road had a major emission of vinyl chloride monomer. That's a chemical which is known to cause cancer of the liver. The Monsanto plant has traditionally had a major problem with benzene emissions. They're known to cause leukemia. Most of the plants around the local area have regular sulphur dioxide emissions, which can cause asthma and a whole range of respiratory complaints. Look, there is the potential in Altona for another Bhopal. All the chemicals are there. You've got plant and equipment which is 20 or 30 years old, outdated techniques, technologies which have been outlawed in the United States as being too environmentally hazardous are being used in Altona with very high volumes of chemicals passing through them every day.
Because you see what's going on, and I know my father worked at some of the factories in Altona, and he said that frequently they were half an hour from going up.
I objected to what was happening, but I wouldn't have gone along to meetings, you know, but I realised it's the only way you could get things done. We went to the Monsanto one. That was very technical, with a lot of technical names that I didn't, know, but I still objected to what they were doing to the atmosphere.
I was at Footscray Market this morning, a still, unusually warm, late April day. The woman at the cash register apologised for being a bit slow.
Sorry, I'm a bit slow today.
I'm not so good today. My eyes are
watery and they hurt. It's the pollution, you know.
I pay for my fruit and go. I am reading The Bhopal Syndrome, a book by David Weir, where he writes about the Bhopal tragedy in India, where a Union Carbide pesticide plant had a massive leak of the gas methyl isocyanate, leaving over 20,000 people seriously injured and up to 5,000 people dead. He argues there are many less obvious Bhopals, where industrial pollution poisons communities slowly. Union Carbide acknowledged after Bhopal that workers there and in West Virginia used watering eyes as a means of detecting leaks in the system.
Closing the Sunoco plant at Smorgans was one. That was a great success. Having the steel mill moved out of our area into someone else's backyard. Signing petitions, yes, and generally just cleaning up, meetings for cleaning up the chemicals, the storage of chemicals that are around our area. We had meetings on that. That's about all.
The transport of chemicals in the area as well was one.
That's right,
we talked about a lot. The actual movement of the chemicals from the other side of town across to our tips, things like that.
So it's really a danger to a lot of more people than just us in this little area here. It covers a wide area of the city, really.
I mean, we have to put up with noise in the middle of the night and from places like Smorgans, and a lot of air pollution that comes in through the windows. We can't go in the backyard because the smell's too horrible. The air's very thick with pollution. There's not enough buffer zone between us and the industries. Therefore, when they do put out these noises and wastes, we get them on top of us. Also, there's not enough parkland for us to move out into for recreation. It's just nowhere to go to escape the air and noise pollution.
Well, I've rung the EPA many times over the past 8 years, I would say. At the beginning, they weren't very cooperative, it just sort of ignored the phone calls. Often when you ring, it's a recorded message anyhow, which I understand they can't be on call 24 hours a day, but they should have the decency to get back to a person.
And it is quite exhausting to, you've got your family life and your social life, and here you are having to go off to meetings when really the EPA are paid to do that sort of thing, and we shouldn't have to put our voice across to say to them, this is how you do your job. They should be out there doing it themselves.
They should be way out where they can't harm anybody,
They're still going to emit chemicals into the atmosphere, and it'll still eventually build up anyway, but it's when it's so close. The main thing that I think is threatening is if you have a spill or you have a fire or an explosion. They're so close together, it's so concentrated that being in between Monsanto and PRA, we would be non-existent. This whole area would go.
Over 450,000 people live in Melbourne's western region. 34% of them were born overseas. They share the area with 563 manufacturing industries. 66 of these are petroleum and chemical industries. 25% of the region's workers are employed in local industry, and the majority of them are from a non-English speaking background.
When my wife hung out, that washings was always covered like with ashes. Then we get bad smells from the noxious industries, and a lot of time even noise. I was doing mostly all the posters. Then a lot of leafleting around, letterboxing. With my wife together, she gave me a lot of support and hand. I don't like to see more noxious industry to coming into the area. Like chemical industries and other noxious industries, like steel mills to enlarge.
But are there some industries that are okay?
Some other industries, they're not so bad.
Yeah. What should happen to those noxious heavy industries?
I think they should all be closed down and moved somewhere else where there's quiet areas and not people around close by.
Memories of teaching in Footscray, and Narelle, in my Year 8 English class, her mother has died of leukaemia. Jason, in Year 7, wears a red cap to cover the baldness caused by chemotherapy and never returns to school from hospital. And in Year 10, another student has leukaemia. In a school of 800 students, someone notices too that students from a nearby primary school have leukaemia. And Karen, another teacher, mentions that her brother and other local solicitors are opposing the relicense of the Monsanto chemical company nearby. It emits benzene, a known cause of leukaemia, and the company has acknowledged emissions of benzene into the air have regularly exceeded the limits provided for in their licence. We get on with our teaching.
The Monsanto action kicked off with a meeting in Sunshine, which was attended by council representatives, EPA representatives, ourselves, residents and Monsanto. This particular QC that Monsanto had instructed was known as the best planning QC in Victoria. Normally his technique followed the same line, which goes a bit like this. Well, Mr. Chairman, they're all here, they've brought their banners with them, they've probably got their tents outside, they're against any new development, they're against progress. We finished up with this particular litany by saying to us, well, exactly why are you here? Well, look, I'll bite the bullet, Chairman. There are excessive levels of benzene, which is, as you know, a chemical capable of causing cancer. There are excessive levels of acrylonitrile, which is a chemical capable of causing chronic lung disease. There are excessive levels of sulphur dioxide, which is both a noxious substance to smell and also capable of causing lung disease.
List of people I have before me who would like to speak.
What sort of smells do we get as we pass the premises, and what would we be breathing in? About 3 weeks ago I rang the EPA in the morning and to say Monsanto, there was a terrible smell coming from Monsanto, and I had no reply back.
Did you ring the company?
No, I didn't ring the company. I rang the EPA, but I didn't get any reply. Could you tell me what it could have been?
It's very difficult to provide an answer in those circumstances. What normally occurs when a complaint is lodged is an inspector is sent out to identify the emission. He then tells you what it is. I cannot comment on why he did not do so in this particular instance.
When my wife puts out the washings, it's covered like with ashes. Then we get the terrible smells. Quite often we go around the Monsanto plant and we wonder that the tree's still alive, let about the human bodies.
And it's the noise that concerns us greatly. You've got this rumble along the ground at night, and you've got this motion about around 3 o'clock in the morning. And then you get up and you ring them in the morning, and they can't understand why we don't like Monsanto. I mean, we have to live there. And the speaker from Monsanto just before has said that the company is spending millions of dollars to control pollution. Well, I can't speak for them, but I pass the place twice a day, and I must hold my breath. And I must put my windscreen wipers on my motor car to clear the mist.
The company would not deny odours emanate from the company.
No, we deny it. In any event, a program is being carried out to make sure that the odours do not come out of the plant.
Can you elaborate on that?
I do not know to what degree of elaboration you want. I must confess I'm getting very concerned about this because I've not heard one thing yet in this matter about discussions taking place in order to resolve the objections. All we have had is 2 hours of a whole series of cross-examinations. The EPA has been cross-examined most relentlessly. There has not been the slightest indication given by the objectors as to how we can direct ourselves to resolve the whole thing. There has been no suggestion of that. On the contrary, what appears to have been done, I am upset about this, is that the forum has been used to attack the EPA in its preliminary determination. We are being attacked just as much.
It is my view that the general feeling here is that the EPA is not doing near enough in terms of the licence, and there is a feeling that it should be more stringent. In summary, Mr. Bruckner, that may be the objection.
The Planning Appeals Board has often said that a company that is licensed gets a privilege. It is not a right in this particular case. Monsanto has a privilege given